Dr. Morrison approached their table with the careful steps of someone entering a minefield. Marcus, I know this is overwhelming, but there are things about your treatment, about those early decisions, that you need to understand. The suppression. Therapy, Thomas said, consulting notes on his phone. I've been researching since Rebecca filled me in, Dr. Morrison. You didn't just help Marcus recover his pre-accident memories, you actively worked to suppress the traumatic period, including his relationship with Nina. Ellen's professional. Composure cracked slightly. The emotional trauma of losing those memories was causing setbacks in his cognitive recovery. We made the decision to focus on stable, non-traumatic memories to rebuild his sense of self. You made the decision to erase me, Nina said quietly. We thought we were protecting him, Rebecca added, tears flowing freely now. Dad convinced us that reopening those wounds would destroy his progress. But Marcus, you have to know removing Nina from your life wasn't healing. It was amputation. Marcus sat in stunned silence as the people who'd shaped his recovery painted a picture of deliberate emotional lobotomy disguised as medical necessity. His father's ambition, his family's fears, his doctor's well-meaning but misguided choices, all conspiring to steal away the most important part of who he'd been. The dreams, he said finally. They're not dreams, are they? They're memories trying to surface. Dr. Morrison nodded reluctantly. Suppressed memories don't disappear, Marcus. They find other ways to manifest dreams, emotional responses, physical reactions to familiar stimuli. Your subconscious has been trying to reclaim what we took away, and my engagement. Marcus's voice was hollow. My carefully constructed life, a monument to our mistakes, Rebecca whispered. Shh, you chose Rebecca. Hartford because she's everything Dad wanted for you, not because she's what you wanted for yourself. The cafe fell silent, except for the rain against the windows and the soft hum of the espresso machine. Nina felt like she was watching Marcus's entire world collapse and rebuild itself in real time. Finally, Marcus stood and walked the old photograph she'd hidden behind the cash register, the faded image of two teenagers at the county fair, their young faces bright with uncomplicated joy. He picked it up with reverent hands, studying faces that were familiar yet strange. I remember this, he said wonderfully. Not the details, but the feeling. The absolute certainty that nothing else in the world mattered except this moment, this girl, this promise we made to each other. He turned to Nina, holding the photograph like a bridge between his past and present. 15 years, Nina. 15 years we lost because other people decided what was best for us. We can't get those years back, Nina said, her voice breaking. No. Marcus agreed, moving closer. But we have right now. We have whatever comes next. And for the first time in 15 years, I know exactly what I want that to be. Knelt beside her chair, pulling the velvet ring box from his pocket, the one Rebecca had finally returned to its rightful owner. I can't remember proposing to you the first time, but I want to remember this moment for the rest of my life. Nina Clark, will you marry me? Will you help me remember how to be the man I was meant to be? Through her tears, Nina saw not the polished CEO or the confused stranger, but the boy who'd loved her completely, who'd promised her forever under a canopy of stars. That boy was still there, buried beneath years of carefully constructed armor, waiting to be remembered. Yes, she whispered, slipping the simple silver ring onto her finger where it belonged. Yes, I'll help you remember. Earth, as Marcus kissed her. For the first time in 15 years, Nina felt the broken pieces of their story finally clicking back together. Outside, the storm was clearing, revealing a sky full of stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first love, their first promises, and now their second chance at forever. Some loves, Nina realized, were strong enough to survive even the darkest forgetting. Some promises were worth waiting a lifetime to keep, and sometimes the heart remembers what the mind has forgotten. It's calling us back to the truths that matter most. The end. The fallout Nina Voss had built her career on reading people. But watching Lucas navigate the media storm felt like observing a masterclass in controlled devastation. As his chief operating officer and oldest friend in this new life he'd constructed, she'd seen him handle hostile board meetings, aggressive competitors, and million-dollar deals with the same unshakable composure he was displaying now. What she hadn't expected was how much the composure would unnerve her. "The Times wants a statement," she said, sliding a tablet across his desk. "So does TechCrunch, Forbes, and about 30 other publications. Your silence is only making the speculation worse." Lucas glanced at the screen without picking it up. "What kind of speculation?" "The usual. Some are calling you a fraud, others a hero." Twitter's divided between hashtag Justice for David and hashtag Lucas lied. The stock's down 18% since yesterday, but oddly, job applications are up 40%. Apparently, people want to work for someone who overcame impossible odds. She studied his face, searching for any crack in that maddening calm. "Lucas, talk to me. Is your life's work imploding in real time, and you're acting like we're discussing quarterly projections?" For the first time since the story broke, Lucas looked directly at her. "Would you rather I panic, rage, start throwing furniture? I'd rather you act like a human being who's been publicly eviscerated by someone who clearly knew you intimately." Nina leaned forward, dropping her professional mask. "Who wrote it, Lucas? Because this wasn't some investigative journalist stumbling onto sealed records. This person knew things that weren't in any file." Lucas was quiet for so long that Nina thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd rarely heard from him. "Her name is Zoe Chen. We were involved in college, before I became Lucas Rivers." The pieces clicked into place with painful clarity. Nina had always wondered about Lucas's complete lack of romantic relationships, the way he deflected personal questions with the skill of someone who'd had years of practice. She'd assumed it was dedication to the company, or perhaps some trust. Issues from his obviously difficult past. She'd never considered that he might be protecting someone else. "She wrote this because you left her," Nina said. "It wasn't a question. Left her because I loved her." Lucas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. David Park was a liability. Every connection he'd made, everyone he'd cared about, was a potential target for Gerald Hawthorne or any of the other monsters from that world. I couldn't risk her getting hurt because of me. Nina felt something uncomfortably close to jealousy twist in her chest. She'd spent 5 years working alongside Lucas, building this company from nothing into a tech giant worth billions. She'd been there through every crisis, every triumph, every late night when the future seemed impossible. She'd never questioned why their partnership had remained strictly professional. Even when the chemistry between them was undeniable, now she understood. His heart had been occupied all along. So he disappeared without explanation and let her. "Think she meant nothing to you?" she said, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. "I thought it would be kinder." God, men are idiots. Nina stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below them, protesters had gathered, some supporting Lucas, others calling for his resignation. The crowd grew larger each hour. "Do you realize she's probably been in love with a ghost for 15 years? And that this article isn't just revenge, it's a cry for help." Lucas looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she could have destroyed you completely, if she'd wanted to. She had your sealed records, Lucas. She could have published everything, the abuse details, the legal battles, your exact methods of identity change. Instead, she wrote a story about systemic failures that positioned you as a survivor, not a victim. Even her anger has love in it." The observation hung in the air between them. Nina watched Lucas process this, seeing him apply the same analytical mind that had built their company to the ruins of his personal life. "The board's meeting tomorrow," she said finally, returning to safer professional ground. "They're going to ask for your resignation, I know. Are you going to fight for this? For what we built?" Lucas was quiet again, but this time Nina recognized the silence. It was the same thoughtful pause that preceded his best strategic decisions. "I'm going to fight for what matters," he said eventually. "The question is whether I've been fighting for the right things all along." Quiet conversations. Thomas Chen had been a detective for 32 years before retiring, and he'd learned to recognize guilt by the way it sat on people's shoulders. His daughter Zoe wore it like a lead blanket as she sat across from him in his kitchen, mechanically stirring sugar into coffee she wasn't drinking. "You published the story 3 days ago," he observed gently. "When's the last time you slept?" Laugh was hollow. "Sleep requires shutting off your brain. Mine's been playing highlight reels of every comment section, every think piece, every talking head debating whether I'm a hero or a monster. Thomas had read the article twice, once as a father worried about his daughter's emotional state, and once as a former investigator impressed by the thoroughness of her research. The story was devastating in its precision, every fact verified, every source documented, every conclusion supported by evidence. It was also unmistakably written by someone in tremendous pain. The story's good work, Zoe. Important work. That foster care system needed exposing. But, she prompted, knowing him well enough to hear the unspoken reservation. But you didn't. It for the foster care system. You wrote it for the boy who left you. Zoe's composure cracked slightly. Does it matter why I wrote it, if it helps other kids? Thomas considered this carefully. In his years of police work, he'd seen plenty of people do the right things for the wrong reasons, and wrong things for reasons that seemed right at the time. Motivation mattered less than outcome in the grand scheme of justice, but it mattered enormously to the people carrying the weight of their choices. Tell me about him, Thomas said instead. Not Lucas Rivers, the CEO. David Park, the boy you loved. For the first time in days, Zoe's expression softened. He was gentle, brilliant, but humble about it. He'd spent hours explaining code to me like it was poetry. Getting excited about these algorithms that could help people find clean water or connect isolated communities. She paused, lost in the memory. He never talked about his childhood, but sometimes he'd get this look like he was somewhere else, somewhere dark. When I'd ask, he'd just say he preferred focusing on the future. Sounds like someone trying very hard to outrun his past. I thought I was part of that future. The words came out bitter. We had plans, Dad. Real plans. Then graduation came and he just vanished. No explanation, no goodbye. I found out he'd transferred his lease, closed his bank accounts, even returned his library books. Erasing himself, Thomas reached across the table and covered her hand with his. And now you know why. Do I? Zoe's voice rose slightly. Because the Lucas Rivers I've been watching on the news for years doesn't look like someone running scared. He looks like someone who conquered the world. Maybe that's the same thing. The observation hung between them while Zoe processed it. Thomas had seen enough trauma survivors to recognize the patterns, the hypervigilance disguised as ambition, the control mechanisms masquerading as success. Some people dealt with powerlessness by accumulating power. Others dealt with abandonment, by leaving first. He messaged me, Zoe said suddenly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. When? Yesterday. Just ... I know it was you. Thank you for not printing everything you could have. We need to talk. She pulled out her phone, showing him the simple text. Nothing else. No anger, no threats, no lawyers. What did you respond? Didn't? Zoe's voice was small. What am I supposed to say? Sorry for exposing your childhood trauma to the entire world. But I was hurt and angry and wanted you to feel as exposed as you made me feel. Thomas studied his daughter's face, seeing the war between her professional pride and personal guilt. Could start with the truth. Which truth? That I still love him? That I hate him? That I've been carrying both feelings for 15 years? And this was my way of making it his problem too? All of it. Zoe stared at her untouched coffee. You built something incredible, Dad. Nexus Technologies employs 12,000 people. Their clean energy initiatives are changing how entire countries think about sustainability. And I might have destroyed all of that because I couldn't let go of something that happened when we were kids, or Thomas said carefully. You might have freed him from carrying secrets that were eating him alive. The possibility seemed to surprise her. In her guilt and anger, she'd focused only on the destruction her story might cause, not the liberation it might offer. The boy you described, David Parkey, sounds like he was drowning in shame about things that weren't his fault. Maybe Lucas. Rivers was just a life preserver that he'd been clinging to so long he forgot how to swim. Zoe looked up at her father with something approaching hope in her eyes. Do you think he might forgive me? I think Thomas said gently. The real question is whether you're ready to forgive yourself and him. New Beginnings, the coffee shop Zoe had chosen, was deliberately neutral territoria. A small place in the Mission District where neither of them had any history, far from the tech corridors where Lucas might be recognized. Early, claimed a corner table. her hands trembling as she ordered a latte she knew she wouldn't be able to drink. When Lucas walked through the door, her breath caught the same way it had 15 years ago. He looked older, more refined, but underneath the expensive suit and careful grooming, she could still see traces of the boy who used to fall asleep over his laptop in the library. The boy who'd kissed her forehead and promised they'd figure out their future together. He spotted her immediately and approached with measured steps, as if he were navigating a minefield, which Zoe supposed he was. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, settling into the chair across from her. His voice was exactly as she remembered, warm, careful, tinged with an accent he'd worked hard to soften. "I wasn't sure I would." Until this morning, Zoe wrapped her hands around her mug, needing something to anchor her. Lucas, I'm sorry. Not for the story it needed to be told, but for the way I told it. For using your pain as a weapon. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed all over again. "I've been angry at a lot of people over the years," he said finally. Gerald Hawthorne, social workers who ignored the signs, the system that treated children like inventory. But I've never been angry at you, Zoe. Not even now. Should. I violated your privacy, exposed your trauma to millions of people you told the truth. His voice was firm but gentle. Do you know how exhausting it's been, carrying David Park around like a guilty secret? Building a life on the foundation of pretending he never existed? Zoe felt tears prick her eyes. Then why didn't you trust me with it back then, when it mattered? The question hung between them, heavy with 15 years of hurt and misunderstanding. Lucas leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, the successful CEO disappeared entirely, leaving only David Park vulnerable and afraid. "Because I loved you too much to risk it," he said. "Gerald Hawthorne didn't just abuse me physically, Zoe. He was obsessed with controlling every aspect of my life. When I aged out of the system, he threatened to fine me, to hurt anyone I cared about. I'd seen what he was capable of, and I couldn't bear the thought of him turning that violence on you. So you decided for both of us?" "Yes." The admission was barely above a whisper. "I told myself I was protecting you, but I was also protecting myself from having to watch you get hurt because of me. It was cowardice dressed up as nobility." Zoe reached across the table, her fingers barely brushing his. "Gerald Hawthorne is dead. Lucas has been for 8 years. I looked it up after I published the story." Something shifted in Lucas's expression: surprise, then a complex mix of relief and grief. "I didn't know. I stopped looking for information about that part of my life because it was too painful." "So you've been running from a ghost." "We both have, haven't we?" The observation settled between them with quiet truth. Zoe had been carrying her own ghost, the boy who'd loved her and left. The future they'd planned and lost, the part of herself that had been frozen at 22, waiting for an explanation that never came. "The board voted," Lucas said suddenly. "Yesterday they asked for my resignation." Zoe's heart clenched. "Did you?" I said no. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "For the first time in 15 years, I told them exactly who I was and what I'd survived to build that company. I told them David Park wasn't a liability to be hidden. He was the reason Nexus Technologies existed in the first place. Everything we've accomplished came from his determination to create something better, and 2 board members walked out. The other 6 voted to keep me as CEO with the condition that I start doing speaking engagements about foster care reform." Lucas's smile widened. "Nina's already booked me for 12 events. She says public. Lucas needs to learn from Private David about turning pain into purpose." Zoe felt something shift in her chest, not of guilt and anger that had been tied. Therefore 15 years slowly beginning to loosen. Nina sounds like a good friend. She's also the one who pointed out that your article could have destroyed me completely, but you chose to write it as a story about survival instead of victimization, she said. Even your anger had love in it. Smart woman, he also said I was. An idiot for thinking I could protect you by disappearing, and that I should have trusted you enough to let you make your own choices about the risks. Zoe laughed, the sound surprising them both. I like her already. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of 15 years of misunderstanding finally beginning to lift. Outside, San Francisco continued its daily rhythm, but inside their small corner of the coffee shop, time felt suspended. "So where do we go from here?" Zoe asked finally. Lucas considered the question with the same careful attention he'd once given to coding problems. "I don't know. I'd like to find out, though. If you're willing." Zoe thought about her father's words, about forgiveness and swimming, and the difference between running from ghosts and finally turning to face them. She thought about the boy who'd explained algorithms like poetry and the man who'd built a company dedicated to making the world better. She thought about second chances and the courage required to take them. "I'm willing," she said, "but we do this differently than before. There's no more secrets, no more deciding what the other person can handle. If we're going to try again, we do it as adults who've survived our own separate versions of hell and chose to find each other anyway." Lucas reached across the table and took her hand properly this time, his fingers intertwining with hers, like muscle memory. "Deal. Though I should warn you, David Park comes with the package now. I'm done pretending he doesn't exist." "Good," Zoe said, squeezing his hand. "I'm looking forward to finally meeting him." Outside, the afternoon sun broke through San Francisco's perpetual fog, casting golden light through the coffee shop windows. It felt, Zoe thought, like the beginning of something entirely new.